Welcome back. It's March 1776, and the British have just left Boston. They took their fleet, the Loyalists, and they sailed off to Nova Scotia. General Howe wanted to sit up there as a good harbor, and he could dispatch messages to Parliament and to Britain for more troops. George Washington, meanwhile, he understands that Boston is really not the ideal place to be. New York City is where they want to be. They want to be in New York City, and he knows that the British are going to go there. So in the beginning of April, he musters up his militia that he has left. A lot of them have left because their enlistments were up, or they just decided to go back to the farm. So he musters up his troops and he marches down to New York City. He had sent General Lee, who we'll hear more about in the future, had sent him down early horseback to search it all out and figure out what was going on. General Lee wrote back and said, this is an indefensible place because it's surrounded by water. So Washington arrives around the third or fourth week of April and starts surveying the situation. Now, you may ask, why is New York City so important? Well, we're going to look at the map here. And you have to remember, Boston is way over here, and New York City is down here. This is the island of Manhattan right in here. Or this is, what happened to Manhattan? This is New Jersey. Here's Manhattan right here. So anyway, so you may say, why is this so important? Well, the British felt that if they could segregate the New England colonies from the rest of the colonies and just deal with this, that the rest of the colonies would just stay loyal to the king. So they have this natural barrier called the Hudson River. And the Hudson River goes all the way from New York City, all the way up, past Albany, all the way up, and goes all the way to the St. Lawrence River through via Lake Champlain. So there's a couple battles we're going to cover that were in Lake Champlain. You have the Battle of Saratoga up here. That's not on this map, but it's up there. We'll talk about that, and Benedict Arnold and Gates, General Gates. But anyway, so the British say, if we can control this, and this is an ideal harbor. It's got a big bay right here. It's quick to go south. It's quick to go to Britain. And it's not that far to go around to go to Boston if you need to go up in here. So it's kind of an ideal central location. Washington knows that the British are going to go here. And so he comes down and he starts building fortifications on both Manhattan and on Long Island. This is Long Island out here. And so he starts building these fortifications, and he builds some up in here because it's almost the narrowest part of the Hudson River. So he figures he can control shipping going up as well. So that's the importance of having control of New York City. So got another little map here. And so I don't know if you all can see this or not very clearly, but here is Manhattan. Here's what Manhattan looks like right here. And then you have Brooklyn. This is all part of Long Island. You have Brooklyn, and you have the Battle of Long Island. We're going to go over that extensively. Then you have Staten Island, which we'll talk about here in just a couple of minutes. And then you have New Jersey. Staten Island is actually part of New York, although it's very, very close to New Jersey. Haven't figured out how that happened, but it does. So anyway, so George Washington sets up his headquarters in Manhattan. And we're going to flip this over one more time. There we go. Now Manhattan is a half marathon long. For you non-runners, that's 13.1 miles. So from the tip to the tip is 13.1 miles. But in 1776, everything above right about here is farmland. All this which we now know with all the buildings and Central Park and all that, it's all farmland. There's a couple houses and plantations and along the edges here on both sides, but mostly it's all farm. And so Manhattan is down here in what they call the Battery. This is called the Battery. And so you have this area down here. And this is what when I refer to Manhattan, this is what we're talking about. So you can see that here's Brooklyn Heights. Here is, over in here is Roosevelt Island. And so all of these things we're going to talk about because the Battle of New York was a complete disaster for George Washington. He divided his troops. And then we'll talk about the Howes. There's General Howe is joined by his brother, who is an admiral in the Navy, and they sit right here in the bay. And they first arrive in about 40 ships. And then as it goes on and on, they start arriving in July. General Howe comes from Nova Scotia. He arrives in July with about 40 ships, and his brother is a week or two behind with an entire fleet. And is in some of the diaries that they have left over is comments that the ships, there were so many ships that you could walk from ship to ship and never get wet. They had a total, in the end, they ended up with 32,000 troops, 10,000 sailors. It was just a phenomenal collection of military people, professional sailors, professional soldiers. So that's Manhattan. We're going to talk about this at length, this battle, because it's very important. And then you now know the reason why New York was more important than Boston even. So the one thing I want to point out on this map here is the Fracas Tavern is right here. That still stands today. George Washington ate there regularly. And in fact, that's where he resigned from the military when the war was all over in 1783. The upstairs of this tavern is a museum. I encourage anybody that has any interest at all in the Revolutionary War and you're in Manhattan to go downtown and have lunch there. It's a marvelous place to eat. The upstairs is just unbelievable. They have the cups from his resignation party. And it's said that in one of the diaries that Washington gave a little speech, and then he asked his people, his soldiers that were with him, not to say anything because he knew that he would cry. So he, just for a point of interest, he got in a carriage, came down to the Battery. From the Battery, he left on a ship, went to the Potomac, and went back to his beloved Mount Vernon. So there you have a brief overview of New York, and we're going to delve into it in the next couple days. Thanks for coming. Bye.